From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, topics that'll be featured at the 2017 Risk and Profit Conference hosted by K-State next week. Art Barnaby will talk about proposed cuts to the federal crop insurance program and the implications those would likely bring to bear for you crop producers. And he'll report on the move to address the price convergence issue in the wheat market. Then, K-State's Gregg Ibendahl will look at strategies for replacing farm machinery, especially at times when profit margins on the farm or ranch are particularly tight. And further ahead, on this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Greg Eyestone will go over the physical signs that tell you apple growers that the fruit is ripe for the picking. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever wondered why livestock producers burn Kansas pasture? Here's the deal. Controlled burning helps preserve the prairie and allows every bite feeder cattle eat to be the most nutritious. National Wildlife and Parks also feel it is a necessity to help with wildlife populations.
So the next time you see a Kansas pasture burning, know it's for the good of our wildlife, our prairie, and our livestock. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for tuning in to this Agriculture Today. And during our first half hour of the broadcast, we're going to offer some advanced looks, if you will, at the program that makes up the 2017 Risk and Profit Conference here at K-State. This is hosted annually by the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State, and it is absolutely chock full of valuable information for you producers should you choose to attend next week. One of those who'll be featured on a multitude of breakout sessions during Risk and Profit, our guest now, Risk Management Specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Art Barnaby. And Art, we want to talk about a couple of the topics that you will be engaging in with attendees in the breakout sessions coming up next week at Risk and Profit. And one of those you have tracked closely as it's been unfolding here, the proposed cuts to the crop insurance program as part of farm policy deliberations. This has resurfaced once more. Where do we stand? You'll be bringing that up.
Well, it'll all get settled in the next Farm Bill because that's where it's going to happen if anything does happen to these proposals. The president put out a thing to really whack the insurance program. And it follows pretty much the same thing that was put out earlier by Sensenbrenner and Kine. Those are two congressmen from Wisconsin, and Senator Flake of Arizona. They submitted legislation to make cuts. The three areas they want to cut is a limit on adjusted gross income, a limit on the amount of premium paid by the government, which is often referred to as a subsidy. So it set that at $40,000, and they want to eliminate the harvest price. Let's go in reverse order because that's probably the simplest. The harvest price is pretty straightforward. They eliminate it or eliminate the share of the government's premium on the harvest price. Probably doesn't make any difference because in the Corn Belt, if you take away the government's share of the harvest price, you're going to really increase the premium cost because the harvest price is probably half of the contract when you sort out all the particulars.
That option is highly popular with growers.
As I was saying to you earlier, we've had 3 new products introduced in the last few years, including a new one this year, margin protection, which will be discussed also. But those products, all of them came out without the harvest price, and within a couple of years, every one of them had it added. And that ought to tell you something about that particular feature. And it doesn't matter what size farm you are. You could be 200 acres and you are getting impacted from this because it will either not be available, or if it is available, you'd have to pay the full premium cost. So it could be very pricey at that point. The second thing that they want to eliminate or put a limit on is the adjusted gross income. The congressmen, they had $250,000 in their adjusted gross limit, which it's getting down there where it could hit some people. But the president's budget has that at $500K. I don't think it makes any difference because once you put this kind of a limit in, they never go away. It's a slippery slope. They start down this path and it's an easy place to cut because we're only affecting a few voters. It doesn't matter about that's the majority of ag production. that's not the point. You only affect a few voters. So that one will have some impacts that I don't think people really thought about. Suppose you're a young farmer that's farming a lot of rented land because you can't afford to buy the amount of land that you really need to farm in order to be commercially viable. You have to get to a certain size because of the economies of scale. It's just a fact. Mm-hmm. And one way you get there is rent farmland. In some cases, they're renting from various investment funds or individuals. Doesn't matter if those folks are over the AGI limit, then they can't participate in the crop insurance. So if you've got crop shares with these kind of entities, that's going to create problems for them. They'll have to go to cash rents probably, and that throws more risk back on the party that can probably least afford the risk. So it will have some impacts on some individuals that are not over the adjusted gross just because of where they're renting land. Mm-hmm. And the other one that we've done most of our analysis on is the impact of this $40,000 limit on the government's share of the premium.
And that could be even more of a blanket impact, if you will, right?
Well, we've run numbers in every county. Now, what we're looking at is average payment per tillable acre. And it really gets interesting. In Kansas, it takes about somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 crop acres. Again, we're combining everything together. So this is your corn and soybeans and wheat and everything to hit this limit. And that varies by year. In some years, it's as little as 1,100 acres. And that's because, see, the premiums and the price selections and the crop insurance contract changes. So you're going to eat the $40,000 up quicker if you're in a year when the premiums are higher and the price selection is higher, and vice versa. So it bounces around, which will create problems because one year you got a problem because you're over the limit, and the next year you're fine.
And producers don't need that instability.
Well, this is going to be fun because they're going to want the crop agent to provide them. Am I going to be over or under? And if you're over, what do you do? Well, I think you'll see a whole lot of things be done. Number one, they're going to try to create new entities. So we're just going to double the paperwork. We obviously have seen with FSA, people are very creative at creating new paper farms. I have no reason to believe that won't occur with this either unless they write the rules so tight that they can't do that. I'd be surprised. But that'll be one of the things they'll do. Then if you can't get around the limits and you're not over the AGI, then you start thinking in terms, well, do I insure the corn and not the soybeans, for example? So where do I want to apply my $40,000 to? And I'm probably going to apply it to the crop that I think is most likely to have a claim, which could create some actuarial issues, but it is what it is. So nonetheless, I think there'll be a lot of different strategies. Will people cut their coverage level back? And then if you got a bunch of people who are uninsured, because I didn't insure my soybeans, and of course the soybeans, obviously that would be the one that would fail. And then you press Congress for a disaster aid. And I don't care if this Congress says no to disaster payments. The next Congress might well say yes.
Right. And it becomes a disincentive for crop insurance participation.
Right. And more importantly, if you go to a private market completely, and let's assume you could actually buy insurance in the private market, it's going to be at least double what you're paying now, if not more, if available. The point being is you're not going to pay those kind of premiums as long as you have the expectation that you will get disaster payments if something big happens, and the infrastructure is there to make the payments. You can see the office in your hometown. So Congress is not going to vote for that. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So there's no way if we revert back to policies that have fewer people insured, I firmly believe that at a bad year we'll get back into the disaster payments.
You will be talking about the repercussions of all of these possible and proposed changes to the crop insurance program as one of the breakout sessions that you'll be directly involved with. Art at Risk and Profit. A quick moment here. We want to acknowledge another of those sessions, and we have had occasion to discuss this here on the broadcast as well. The ongoing issue of non-convergence of wheat prices. There has been some action taken that will kick into effect next year, and you'll be sharing what that's all about.
Actually, this ties right back to crop insurance because the price on crop insurance is determined by the futures markets, and if you don't have convergence, it's not giving you the full value of the protection that you thought you had. So all these programs tend to be interconnected. The CME has made significant changes to the contract, which I'm sure you've seen in the press. Starting in March of 2018, they're going to a variable storage rate, and eventually that storage rate is going to get high enough to where nobody's going to pay it. And the long is going to stop making those storage payments, and they'll turn around and convert the paper into real wheat, and that's when you should get convergence. Or at least that's the theory. We're going to find out. You can imagine, I've had a lot of conversations about this particular issue from people who are in the industry as to what they think the impact will be. Nonetheless, it affects the insurance program. It's going to affect, if it works the way the supporters of the VSR say, it will affect the local basis because it'll bring that convergence together. Well, see, that's going to affect what you're getting offers in the way of forward contracts. It's going to affect minimum price contracts, deferred price contracts. Effectively even the cash bid is all mixed up in that too. So it's even more than just those who are directly selling futures, which is the smaller percentage of farmers. So that is a point that we will be discussing in greater detail. Depending on who comes, it could be a really lively conversation because based on our feedback, there is a lot of disagreement over the VSR. I just came from some national meetings where the developer of the VSR was actually arguing that it's eventually going to be put on the corn-soybean contract. If out in the future soybeans got caught in a position where we didn't get convergence, I think obviously they would go to the VSR fairly quickly. So that's where we're at, and like I said, that could be a very lively discussion.
This is a significant change that will affect wheat markets in Kansas for sure. Coming up in 2018, it'll be fully detailed by Art and his colleagues, and questions will be bantered back and forth concerning that change during that session on non-convergence in the wheat market. Art will tell folks here a little later on the broadcast about how to register for the conference. Looking forward to hearing what you have to share there. Thanks for the preview. Art Barnaby is a risk management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, and we'll tell you about yet one more breakout session taking place at Risk and Profit next week after we step aside for these few moments. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now, and yet more of the information that will be passed along to those attending the upcoming Risk and Profit Conference that K-State Agricultural Economics again will be hosting this next week, Thursday and Friday to be exact, the 17th and 18th of August. And our guest now will be talking with the audience about decision-making when it comes to replacing farm equipment and some of the things that go into those replacement strategies. Gregg Ibendahl is back with us. He is a farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. The costs of replacing implements and other equipment, well, they can be substantial and, of course, can be a big economic consideration, Greg.
Yeah, when you look at things, I mean, after land cost is probably the biggest cost to most producers, but after that, machinery becomes the biggest issue for most producers. And, trying to find ways, and really there's probably two issues going on. One is, what does that do to profitability? But probably the biggest issue right now is, what does that do to cash flow? Because you have depreciation, which is a non-cash cost. So that can affect things quite a bit. So you can actually have something show up as an expense through depreciation where really it doesn't affect your cash flow. So really producers kind of need to look at both those angles when they're looking at the whole machinery side of things.
It's not just a matter of machinery or equipment wearing out. It is actually when it becomes economically disadvantageous to hold on to machinery, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, I guess in a perfect world, and we were just strictly looking at profitability, we would say, you would hold your equipment basically until the cost of holding that equipment one more year is higher than the cost of purchasing something new. And that tends to happen because as you hold equipment, it requires more and more repair costs every year, and we tend to look at that as an upward sloping type curve thing. And eventually, you reach a point where it's just so much in repairs and maintenance every year, and through improvements in the newer equipment, that you're really better off getting a new piece of equipment, and that'll show up somewhere when you look at the lifespan of a piece of equipment.
Let's wander a bit into some of that which you'll be presenting at Risk and Profit. And one of the things you will be examining in your presentation, you say, what criteria producers tend to use when they go about machinery decisions?
Well, I don't think really producers they don't really look at necessarily from the profitability side. I think they're looking at more from the cash flow side. And really it kind of goes back to what farmers hate the most of anything, and that's really paying taxes. And we always say producers are profit maximizers out there, but I think there's some producers out there who really their goal is not to pay any taxes. So, and you can kind of really do that by the level of equipment that you hold. So what producers have really done, when we saw these good years for grain farmers from like 2007 to 2012, where grain prices were really high and net farm income was pretty high, a lot of producers end up buying equipment just to kind of get their tax burden down. And I'm not going to say that's a bad or a good strategy, but it is certainly a strategy that most producers actually tend to practice quite a bit here, not only here in Kansas, but really across the U.S.
So it's really more than just purchasing in good years, not so in bad years. It's much more involved.
Well, it can be, but I think that's the way a lot of producers think about it. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. So if you look at the current level of machinery on most grain farms here in the state, it's probably at a pretty high level yet, because most producers tend to stock up and they replace a lot of their equipment. And really, if you look at our KFMA database, you'll see that most producers now have, when you look at like a crop machinery on a per acre basis, most producers probably have at a higher level of machinery per acre than they probably ever have before. And really, that's not a cost neutral decision to do that. There is a cost to buying equipment. Certainly, that's the upfront cost. But once you actually own the equipment, there's some costs there too. So every year you're going to have depreciation. And really, you need to think of depreciation as really a combination of both the age of the equipment and how much you use it. So the fact that you may not be using it all that much is still going to go down in value just because it's sitting in your shed, and then kind of the technology is changing and it needs to be run some point there. So there's depreciation just from having it stored. But producers also need to remember too that there is a cost to actually holding on to that equipment. So, basically all that money you have invested in machinery, you could actually be investing that money in some other asset. Certainly a savings account not going to pay a whole lot, but if you had it in a stock market fund or something like that. So all that money you have tied up in equipment is basically, it's almost like burying in the ground. It's not earning you any interest out there, whereas if you had it somewhere else, it could at least be earning you some money somewhere else. So that's a cost producers need to think about. It doesn't show up in your taxes, but it is something farmers need to think about.
Using net farm income, for instance, which we talk about with Kansas Farm Management Association data, you'd like producers to think beyond just using that year-by-year figure as their trigger mechanism, if you will?
Well, I think, again, farmers are really looking at the idea as far as net farm income. What would be the ideal situation would be if you actually had kind of the same level of net farm income year in and year out. That would really kind of help in the tax situation. So producers are buying equipment during these good years to get their tax burden down, where normally they would have some really high tax liabilities. And by contrast, when years aren't so good, like we've had the past couple of years, you tend not to buy anything, or maybe very little, and that will help on the cash flow, and it will actually help increase maybe not necessarily your net farm income so much, but will certainly on the cash side, because you don't really have that expense going out for equipment than that you would have in some years. So that helps to even things out. It helps with the overall tax liability that way.
Now, some lenders may look at the sheer numbers, such as net farm income, and use that as a baseline for their decisions on providing the financial resources to buy equipment. What do producers do in that circumstance when low income numbers are making that lender a bit reluctant?
Well, it kind of goes back in the strategy really farmers are kind of following now. So in good years, you kind of stock up on the equipment, and you can really almost think of that equipment as having money in the bank. So you basically build up this bank of equipment, and now that we're in some lean years as far as net farm income is concerned, we're kind of drawing back from that bank of equipment. And like I said earlier, we stocked up on equipment during that 2007 to 2012 period. So now I would expect most producers are drawing drawing that account of the machinery back down. So the fact that the lender says you really can't buy an equipment this year, that really shouldn't be probably too big a deal for most producers, because most producers are in pretty good shape as far as equipment-wise is concerned.
So is that representative of the kind of strategies that you'll be talking up at Risk and Profit, Greg?
Well, you probably need to think about it. Really, there's several things producers can go about when they're looking at how they replace machinery. So one strategy would be to replace everything when it reaches its maximum lifespan, when it wears out, and then you buy the next piece of equipment. Now, that doesn't always work good for the cash flow things, because sometimes if you follow that strategy, you're going to have something wear out during a period of lean net farm income, and you don't have the cash to do it that way. That would be the optimal as far as maximizing profitability. Another strategy, if you really want to kind of look at kind of evening out your profitability, might be to look at replacing a certain percent of your equipment every year. So maybe replace like 10% of your equipment every year, and that way you kind of have the same amount going out every year. You know, the strategy I said most producers are farming, I think it's probably really the best strategy as far as when it comes to maximizing your amount of cash that you have, is you stock up on equipment during the good years, you buy more than you normally would, and then in lean years you buy less. That tends to be probably the best as far as the cash flow situation is concerned. And finally, there is a strategy, too, that I think some producers probably practice as well, and that is basically to keep your equipment forever, basically till it falls apart. And that strategy will work as long as you have some kind of backup equipment on hand. Certainly, you run the risk if you keep equipment very long, you're going to maybe have some breakdown during some critical times. So producers who have maybe a little bit of extra equipment, you know, basically keeping it until it falls apart is also a viable strategy.
Now, that latter example, one could look at leasing or renting equipment temporarily if that were necessary.
Yeah, and certainly producers don't need to get in the mindset of buying everything. There's other ways in controlling farm assets, and certainly your equipment dealer will work with you in a lot of those. So you can certainly rent. You can have a custom operator come in. You can have your neighbor come in and do something. So there are other strategies out there available that producers can look at, especially when times are tough and you really need the cash. You know, it makes more sense to look at some of these other strategies. You know, my rule of thumb is the more often you use a piece of equipment, the more likely you are to buy it. The more specialized that equipment comes, the more likely you are to have a custom operator or actually rent to control that asset.
Well, again, this requires of a producer to remain nimble in their decision-making, does it not? And pardon the expression, go with the flow.
Yeah, you know, certainly look at all the options out there. Think about things maybe you haven't done before. You know, a lot of producers, I think, get in the mindset, well, I've always bought this equipment, I need to keep buying in the future. You know, that may not be the case. And then certainly look at, maybe you have a certain equipment dealer that you like to deal with. We'll certainly shop around and see what the other equipment dealers have. That may or may not work depending on what area you're in. But, there's certainly a lot of strategies out there. It pays to invest in all these. There may even be a chance that you can maybe trade equipment with your neighbor if you don't have equipment that you don't think you're going to use all that much, and maybe you and your neighbor could split something like that. So there's really all kinds of options. You just need to kind of think about things you haven't tried before.
And in that, you're welcoming producers who attend Risk and Profit to bring their questions about procuring farm equipment to you, and you'll discuss tangibles with them at Risk and Profit.
Yeah, like I said, I think during these periods of low profitability, I think making sure you have enough cash to live on is going to be critical for the next couple of years. So, I think a lot of the strategies are going to revolve around trying to maximize your cash flow.
Very well. Greg, looking forward to hearing what you have to say at Risk and Profit on this subject, in addition to what we've shared today. Thanks for coming over. We appreciate your time.
All right, thanks.
He's a farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension, is Gregg Ibendahl. Again, his breakout session is entitled Replacing Farm Equipment, and you can sign up for that, several other of the breakout sessions, and take in much more at the 2017 Risk and Profit Conference here at K-State, and it is knocking on the door. It is next Thursday and Friday, the 17th and 18th of August. The location is the Alumni Center on the K-State campus, and you've still time to register by going to agmanager.info and find out all the details, including the registration procedure, right there at agmanager.info. Hoping to see you here in Manhattan for the Risk and Profit Conference here at K-State. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll stand aside now for these next few moments and then return with more here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Over now to today's agricultural news headlines for you in brief, courtesy in part of DTN. Walt Disney Company paid Beef Producers Incorporated a settlement of at least $177 million as a result of that defamation suit filed against ABC News by beef producers over the network's coverage of lean, finely textured beef. This according to a third-quarter financial report released by Disney earlier this week. BPI had sought $1.2 billion in damage in a suit that alleges ABC's coverage of lean, finely textured beef led to the unraveling of the company's business, lost markets, closed plants, and lost jobs. Now, the opening statements in the trial against ABC and correspondent Jim Avila were back in early June. The trial was scheduled to last until late July, according to an Associated Press story. However, ABC and BPI announced on June the 28th they had reached a settlement. Terms of the settlement were not disclosed at that time. This week, Disney, which of course owns ABC, reported in its financial report a one-time charge of $177 million incurred in connection with the settlement of litigation. BPI filed the lawsuit in response to 11 live broadcasts and 14 online reports over a 30-day stretch starting in March of 2012. During that time, the lawsuit alleged, anchors and reporters made more than 200 false and misleading statements and caused consumers to believe that LFTB product was not beef at all and unsafe for public consumption, even though the company said it provided volumes of information about its product to ABC. The network used the term pink slime some 130 times during the broadcasts, despite information provided to ABC by the company as the product being 100% beef. As a result of the broadcasts, BPI said its sales fell by about 80%. It was forced to close 3 of 4 processing plants, including one in Kansas, and lay off about 700 employees and will have sustained about $400 million in lost sales. Now, according to an economic analysis conducted by Iowa State University economics professors Dermot Hayes and Daniel Otto, lean, finely textured beef was as much as 850 million pounds of the annual beef supply back in 2011. Their report said the 300 million pounds of lean, finely textured beef that would have been produced through the end of 2012 was worth $273 million, with another $300 million in lost sales through economic multiplier effects. The millennial generation represents a huge opportunity for the beef industry as young people earn more and spend more. Todd Domer talks here about how checkoff dollars currently are being used to reach this influential audience on a regional basis.
An ongoing video promotion funded by 6 state beef councils, including Kansas, has gained broad exposure with millennials, the beef industry's primary target audience. The Checkoff campaign, featuring videos for Burger Bar Beef 101 and a recipe for bulgogi lettuce wraps, generated 1.02 million views at a cost per view of 3 cents through July the 10th. The burger video debuted in late May, with the wrap recipe launching in July. The video campaign is a joint venture between the Missouri, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas beef councils. At 3 cents per view, the Beef Council Coalition cut the cost from the same promotion last year and stretched the reach of checkoff dollars. To date, the most consumer impressions generated by the campaign have come from Michigan and Illinois, which correlates with the funding and population percentages identified in the original marketing plan. The view rate is 27.5% of those who were exposed to the ads on social media and watched at least 30 seconds of the videos. Views from mobile devices have accounted for 51% of the total. The goal of the Beef Council group is to maximize views and reach of the videos among target consumers. Reaching older millennial parents is a priority for the campaign, which ends September 30th. I'm Todd Domer.
And you're listening to Agriculture Today. Coming your way now, our regular Thursday feature from the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Kansas Soybean Update. And with that, as always, Greg Akagi. Greg?
Jim Miller, a Nebraska soybean producer, serves as the chairman of the U.S. Soybean Export Council. And Jim, back on July 13th, China back into the market, making significant purchase agreements to purchase U.S. soybeans.
We had a purchasing agreement signing ceremony with the Chinese delegation, and they signed agreements to purchase just a little over $5 billion worth of soybeans, or about 460 million bushels. So I believe that was just a little over a third of what their annual needs are from the U.S., so it's getting us off to a great start for the new marketing year.
And this really helps as far as the long-term outlook is concerned because of that global demand exists for U.S. soybeans.
Yes, it does. There's huge global demand for U.S. soybeans. It really helps to reiterate the fact of the work that we've been doing in China for the last 35 years. This year we'll be celebrating the 35th anniversary of doing work in China, and it really helps show that what we do over there has had an impact on building our preference for U.S. soy.
We always talk about their growing middle class that is eating more protein and wanting to consume more protein as well. But another thing about that is they also have the world's largest swine herd, and that plays a big factor into that too.
That's a lot of the work that we've done is we've helped them to grow and develop their swine industry and to utilize soybean meal in their diets for their livestock industry. China produces 6 times more hogs than we do here in the U.S., so that in itself is a huge demand for soy protein.
But once again, it goes back to that hard work that has been done throughout the years.
In 1990 was the first year that China started purchasing soy and started importing soy. In the last 22 years, that imports of soy from around the world has grown to 84 million metric tons, and they project that by the year 2020 that they will be importing over 100 million metric tons. So the demand for soy protein in China continues to increase. These signing agreements really show the commitment that China has wanting to work with U.S. and purchase U.S. soy. With all the talk about sanctions with China and that type of thing, with these purchasing agreements, this really shows China's commitment to want to buy U.S. soy and to work with the U.S. in purchasing our products to help with the balance of trade.
All right, Jim, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate your calling on this.
That's Jim Miller, a Nebraska soybean producer who serves as chairman of the U.S. Soybean Export Council. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi with the update. Many thanks, Greg. We'll take one final break now and then return with this week's K-State Horticulture segment for you right here on the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Up now on this Agriculture Today, our weekly K-State Horticulture segment. This time we'll go to the fruit garden, particularly the apple tree. For those of you who are growing this highly popular fruit, there are certain tip-offs to apple ripeness and harvest readiness. We'll get into those now with Gregg Eyestone joining us once again. Greg, as you know, is the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent. And there are several indicators here, Greg.
Yeah, there's lots of things that indicate when they may be ripe, and so there's not necessarily one silver bullet. If there was, I guess maybe taste would be the way to go, and you definitely can harvest a few and cut them and see how the flavor is in them. Probably at this time of the year, they're going to be a little bit starchy and not as sweet as if we wait a while longer. Generally, we like to accumulate those sugars as we get into the fall season, as the temperatures in the evenings drop off. That's probably when you start to see some maturity in some of your apples.
All right. But there are very strong indicators when the apple changes color, are there not?
Yeah, that's probably your first inkling that things are starting to mature, is to look at that color. You probably have a green color that you're kind of familiar with. You've been watching it for the last few months, and that'll start to fade into a nice, more creamy background color instead of the green color on, let's say, our red apples. Golden Delicious, a yellow apple, that also will soften up a little bit, go from a deeper yellow to more of a mellow yellow as it becomes more mature.
So how much of a color change needs to happen before that apple is deemed ripe?
That'll happen probably before it is actually truly as flavorful as you'd like to harvest that. And when we talk about these background colors, probably the best place to look for that is at the calyx, or the flower end, so the bottom of your apple. Also, where it is attached to the stem of the tree branch itself, that color will be where the change will take place. That you'll want to scout out and make sure that is starting to become less of a deeper green to a lighter green, or maybe red or yellow, as depending on the variety.
Now, this is a gradual process. One doesn't have to monitor this 24/7 by any stretch, right? But on a regular interval.
Probably once a week, take a look at that. You may, if you've grown this particular variety for a while, you'll probably have an inkling of what time of the season that occurs. Of course, we know that seasons are variable, and so this year, we were hot for quite a while. We've gone into a cooler time frame, so that will slow the process down some, and so you'll kind of get a feel for it. The color is one thing to look at. There are several other things you can use. If you start to see a lot of apples falling off, some of them become more mature and will easily separate from the tree. So that may be an indication that you need to be scouting if you're seeing some dropping out of the tree. Again, we talked about flavor, so go ahead and you can cut some. Some may have a little more aroma as they mature. One nice thing about apples is you don't have to maybe go to full maturity. With some of our weather conditions, you may not want to let them become fully ripe on the tree, depending on if you think we're going to get some weather incidents like hail storms, also heavy rain, something like that, which would knock more of them off than you'd prefer.
They will ripen off the tree, then.
They do. You do want to get them to kind of a mature stage so they have their sugars in there, but as far as softening up, so to speak, there's a lot of crispy apples out there, but they will go ahead and mature and their flavors develop indoors after you've harvested it.
If one, Greg, tracks such details as the bloom date for their apples, one can make predictions on full maturity based on the type of apple you're growing, you say?
Yeah, there's an average on how many heat units it takes to mature fruit. And so if you know which variety you have, you may be able to kind of correlate that with a calendar chart or something like that to give you an indicator as well. If you have several varieties, you may have ones that do mature. Not all apple varieties mature on the same time. So like Granny Smith, our oldest variety, that probably will be into mid to late October when it would be fully ripe, would be kind of our last one of the season. And we have ones that we call summer apples, or ones we usually use for applesauce, like a Lodi, and that one's probably already been harvested and done for the season. And so we have a wide range in between there of when these will mature and be ready to be utilized in the house.
And so Jonathan apples, for instance, they might be within those two extremes somewhere?
That's right, yeah, probably somewhere in the middle between there. We used to have wine saps, stamen wine saps. Again, that's more in the older or longer growing period, and so depends on the variety that you have will indicate on how ripe that becomes. So that goes back down to your visual observations. The seed maturity, that would be a good way to indicate. Of course, you'll have to cut your apples open and see. You've probably eaten an apple with a seed in it, so you know what the maturity. A brown hard seed is the mature side. So if you cut one open and it's a little white or green still in there, then you indicate that has some time to continue to mature.
And the color of the flesh of the apple itself, without saying, really, that will be a sure sign, won't it?
Yeah, again, when you cut that open and sample some, you probably get a feel for what your variety of apples should look like inside. Of course, it's going to be, we all know about green apples and what that does to your tummy and those kind of things. And so the fruit flesh, as it turns more mature, probably going to become more creamy, more yellow texture for many of the apples. There's a lot of apple varieties out there, and they're all going to have some unique characteristics, and you'll kind of just develop a feel for your varieties that you have on how you prefer to taste them and enjoy them, because they range from a very tart apple to the really sweet, I call it a little more mushy type of texture, to the really crisp ones, which are really popular nowadays.
Well, in the end, patience is a virtue as far as apple harvest, right?
I would say we're probably pretty early here, but as we get into the fall weather conditions, you may want to take that into a situation. A frost, something like that's not really a critical thing on apples. I'm not concerned about getting them harvested if they're not mature before frost, if we were to have a really early one. But I'm more concerned about wildlife enjoying your fruit along with maybe a hailstorm or something that can occur, and you want to make sure that you're able to get your harvest in and enjoy your fruit.
By following these guidelines that will be good signs of harvest-ready apples, why, you can get the best quality possible out of that fruit. And Greg, we appreciate you coming over and sharing these tips. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
And our guest on this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Gregg Eyestone, the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent. Coming up tomorrow, our weekly segment on the grain markets, where we'll review that greatly anticipated USDA crop production report. Coming out later this morning, K-State's Dan O'Brien will take those numbers up with us. Hope you'll rejoin us then. Meantime, Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.